Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Stephanie Ramos. I'm the events manager here at Internet Creations. Really excited about today's webinar. We have a ton of people on the line, so let's get it started. So again, my name is Stephanie. I am the events manager here, so I'm in charge of putting together some of the stories and presentations that we have. And I'm really, really excited because this is the first time I've done a webinar with this person. She's a Texas native, 10-time certified lead Salesforce consultant, and a home brewer. So she just celebrated by, she just finished, I think is what we call it, her cherry mead over there in Dallas, Texas, and it looks very delicious. So hope you'll share some of that when we're all out of this quarantine. But very excited to introduce you to Rachel Garten.
Hi everyone, happy about this webinar. Can't wait to get started.
So first things first, let's just practice. I want to know where y'all are joining us from. I'm here in Point Pleasant, New Jersey, right here on the beach. We can't go to the beach, but I'm close. And so where are you tuning in from? Rachel, you're in the Dallas area, right? Where specifically in Dallas are you?
Yes, I'm actually from a smaller town called Denton, Texas. It's about 45 minutes north of Dallas, so close enough to the city to have fun, but also a little bit of that small town vibe.
Great. And then Rachel, if you can just advance the next slide, you can always put your questions in the questions box, or I think yeah, there you go. And you can put your stuff in the questions box or in the chat. I'll be monitoring both throughout the webinar. So if you have questions you want us to stop, we'll definitely make it, give us some time at the end. So looks like we have people tuning in from a lot of Texas people, Metuchen, New Jersey, Chicago area. Someone says Denton is a mead hotspot. Outside of Houston, Canada, Boston, Ohio, LA, Denver, Philly. This is great. Ooh, people calling from the UK. Awesome. I love it. So, Rachel, thank you first, everybody, for India. That's amazing. Oklahoma City. We have people tuning in from all over the world, Rachel. This is fantastic. Thank you so much. So let's get it started. I'm going to turn off my webcam so focus less on me and more on what Rachel has to say, but let's get it started.
All right, awesome. Let's dive right in. So thank you so much for joining. Today, we're going to be talking about the developer console and how admins can leverage it for their troubleshooting and data sleuthing in their day-to-day work. So we're going to be talking about why you should care about the developer console as an admin, what it can do for you specifically from a non-development standpoint. We're going to look at how to access the console, whether you're in Lightning or in Classic. We're going to look at how to debug your own actions, how to debug other users' actions, and how to investigate data issues with Query Editor. So we're going to talk about all of that kind of at a high level first, and then we're actually going to dive right into Salesforce with a live demo and troubleshoot a real issue with the developer console. Debug my actions, debug another user's actions, and then look at some data issues and do some data tweaking with all in that console screen. And then at the end, we also have some more resources for you so you can get hands-on and keep learning after the webinar. So first, the developer console. What really is it? So it is the Salesforce native IDE, which is the only acronym in this entire webinar, and that stands for Integrated Development Environment. And what that really means is it helps synthesize and extend some of the functionality via setup. So not all of the functionality, so you can't, like build a flow or a process builder in the developer console, but it pulls a lot of the debugging, troubleshooting, query functionality that you typically have to access a bunch of different places in setup, all neatly in one screen. So what it can do for admin, so it has a lot of developer focused features, but what it can do specifically for an admin is it can help generate logs in real time. So say goodbye to the days of having to go over to debug logs, schedule something for yourself, start testing, and then only realize that you're in the middle of testing and your log has already expired. You have to go back and reset it. So it generates logs in real time for you really easily. You can also see more detailed error messages. So instead of just the normal error messages that pop up on a screen, you can actually see all the nitty-gritty error details. You can also see details about the silent failures. So maybe a process, you're not getting any error messages, but it's still not working like it's supposed to. You can see all of that information in the logs. You can troubleshoot order of operations issues. So maybe one workflow is firing before another, and that's causing problems. You can look at governor limits. So maybe you're hitting the, everyone's favorite error, the too many SQL query limits. You can easily see what processes are running when that limit's being hit to help you isolate stuff that might need optimization. You can explore data quickly instead of having to go and write a whole report. You can quickly pull in fields and query data, compare different data sets all on the single screen. And then if you see a data issue, you can quickly update data issues on the fly without having to navigate to all the records individually in Salesforce. So, how to access the console. So if you're in the Lightning experience, then you'll access the console via the gear icon that you usually go to set up, and it'll pop open into a new screen. If you're in the Classic experience, you'll click on your name and then click on Developer Console. So here you can see with and without the global header, and it'll also open in a new screen. The nice thing about the console for the purposes of this webinar is once it's open, it will look exactly the same and function exactly the same in Classic or in Lightning. So you don't have to worry about it having to relearn if you go from Classic to Lightning. One other just thing to mention is that since these screenshots are taken from a system admin perspective, I have access to the console, but normal users won't be able to access this. And in fact, you have to have both API enabled as well as view all data permission in order to view the developer console. So just a side note that if you aren't a full system admin in an org, you won't be able to access it through these means. So we'll get into this in a little more detail in the demo, but just kind of at a high level, you can debug in the console. So you can see over here on the side, I have a screenshot of the developer console, and I have some different logs that are being generated for me. I can filter the logs, compare logs, see detailed error messages, control what columns and rows I'm looking at in the log, and we'll talk about that all in the demo more. So it automatically generates the logs for me. So as I'm testing, the logs will automatically pop up just because I have the developer console open. So again, no need to go in and manually schedule a log for yourself. You can easily schedule logs for other users. So if I need to quickly troubleshoot as somebody else, maybe there's a permission issue I'm trying to troubleshoot, and so I'm not having the problem, but other users are, I can quickly log in as those other users, troubleshoot the permissions issue, log in as them, and continue to see the log generated in real time in the console. And then you can also, like I mentioned, there's some nice filtering and viewing functions in the console that we'll look at more detail in the demo, just to make it a lot cleaner to look through the log and isolate the specific information you're looking for, instead of like sometimes you go to download a log from setup and it's this like giant text file. It's just a horrible pain to have to go through to find information. The other feature, aside from just the debug logs that we're going to look at as well, is the query editor. And this allows you to quickly and easily look at specific data about records in your system and then update those records. So you can actually open objects and view the field definitions, kind of like you would an object manager. You can quickly add fields to a query and then make quick updates to those fields on the fly. So maybe you're troubleshooting some records that are having a problem. You see that one or two of them have some bad data in the fields. You can quickly go correct the data in the console and save them in Salesforce directly, so you don't have to go to each individual record and make the change. You can also quickly access the records in Salesforce. If for some reason you want to look at more detail for the page specifically, you can say, hey, I want to open this, this account or this contact in Salesforce and see what my users are seeing in the UI. So we're going to now dive in to the actual troubleshooting demo, and this is where I'll give you a much more in-depth orientation of the console, so you can actually see everything that I'm clicking, all the steps I'm taking, so that you know a little bit more detail. So for the demo, you're a system admin in an org, and Amy from customer service is having trouble with an automated case close process. So typically in your org on a case, there's a custom resolution field. When you select part replacement as the resolution before you close a case, a new replacement part order record is supposed to get created for the contact, it's supposed to be tied to the case. So that way our fulfillment team can go and send the replacement part to the customer. The problem is sometimes Amy isn't seeing the replacement part order getting created. So she's not getting any error messages. So it's going to be kind of hard to troubleshoot. She doesn't really know what's going on. She just knows that sometimes when she closes the case, the part replacement is set, a replacement part gets created sometimes, and sometimes the order isn't getting created at all. So she's not sure what's happening. So to troubleshoot this, we're going to be using both the debug logs in the developer console, as well as the query editor to troubleshoot some of the data. So let's go ahead and dive in to Salesforce. So here I'm logged in as an admin for now, and I'm on the case screen. So I want to do some troubleshooting first to see if I can reproduce Amy's issue. So before I do anything, I'm going to go ahead and open the developer console. So again, because I'm in a Lightning experience, I'm going to go to the gear icon up at the top, click Developer Console, and it's going to open for me in a new window. Just let it load for a second. So one handy thing you might have noticed as it opened is it actually keeps all of the stuff I was working on from my last session, which can be really handy. But I'm going to go ahead and blank everything out for now. So before we get into the actual troubleshooting, I'm going to give you guys a little bit more detailed orientation of the developer console, because I know the screenshots don't really do it much justice. So again, the developer console does have a lot of features that are more developer centric. They're more for writing Visual Force and Apex code, for troubleshooting code, stuff like that. So for an admin, we're really only worried about the debug log capabilities and then the query editor to do the data investigation. So for that, you'll only really need to go to 4 spots in the developer console. Up at the top, you'll go to File, and there's some stuff in here that you'll need to access to open objects, look at fields. You'll need to go to Debug, and this is where a lot of the debug settings that we're going to be tweaking here in a moment. This is where all the debug settings for the debug logs can be found. Then at the bottom, there is the Query Editor workspace, as well as this other tab here, the Logs workspace. And this is where the logs will get generated for me automatically. So as an admin, you really only ever need to go to one of these 4 spots, File and Debug at the top, and then the Logs tab and the Query Editor tab at the bottom. So quickly, I'll just show you what the developer console can do when you are troubleshooting. So I'm going to go ahead and actually do a split screen, just that way we can look at Salesforce as well as the developer console all at once. So kind of a crowded screen, but I want you guys to be able to see the immediate log generation that the developer console can do. So what I'm going to do first is just hop into a case, go through the case close process, and see if I can reproduce Amy's issue. So I have my developer console open. And again, because I have it open and I'm just trying to troubleshoot my own actions, I don't have to do anything else. Just having the console open, it's automatically going to log everything that I do. So I'm just going to jump into one of these cases, and I'm going to go through, use our custom case close process to close the case and see the log get generated for me. So I have this custom close case action that Amy and her team has been using. And when I go to this custom action, it'll automatically default to close, and I'm going to pick the resolution part replacement because that's the special resolution type that drives the replacement part order process. So I'm going to go ahead and click save to close the case. And over here, you can see in the console, a log got generated for me immediately as soon as I took the action. And since I'm in the console, I don't have to worry about going back to setup, going to debug logs, grabbing the logs from there, opening it up, and then navigating back to the case to do more testing. I can just test as much as I need to all in Salesforce and then have all the logs generated for me over on the side in the console. So you'll see when the log got generated, there are a few things I can just immediately see without even opening the log. I can see the user that was being debugged. So for now, it's just myself. There's some information about, if I'm in the browser, the operation that was happening. I can see the exact date and time down to like the millisecond, basically, that the debug log was generated. So I can easily isolate the exact time of this action. There's a status for success. So if I'd hit an error message, then the error message would have shown in this status bar. But again, Amy is saying she's not hitting any error messages when the problem's happening. So it's just saying success right now because it's a silent failure. Salesforce doesn't know that there's a problem. And then something else that's handy is there's a red status. So because I haven't opened this log yet, it still shows unread. And that can be really handy because if you have, 6, 7, 10 plus logs getting generated, you can easily see which ones you've already opened versus which ones you haven't looked at yet. So I'm not going to click into this log just yet because I actually want to show how we can troubleshoot as Amy as well. So before we switch to Amy, I do see on the Salesforce side, it says success, the case got closed, and I can look at the related, and it does look like the replacement part order got created on this case. So I can't reproduce Amy's issue necessarily. So I'm going to jump in to troubleshoot as Amy and to see what happens there. So for that, I actually have it open in a new window just to kind of keep things smooth. So right now I am on Amy's user record, and this is typically where you can go to log in as another user to test. But I'm not going to log in as her first because what I want to do is make sure the developer console is open and set up to log Amy. So again, I'm going to go have the console open. And typically when you're troubleshooting yourself, just as an admin, opening the console, everything works for you automatically. You don't have to worry about scheduling any logs or anything like that. When you want to troubleshoot another user, however, you do need to take a couple steps just to make sure that the developer console is logging stuff properly and that you can access it easily. It's still much easier though than trying to go to set up debug logs, schedule for the user, come back, log in as them, test, log out as them, go back to the logs. It's just so many steps. So this is still much, much easier for troubleshooting than trying to do it kind of the old-fashioned way. So first thing I'm going to do is make sure that I have a log set up for Amy. So to do that, I'm going to go up here at the top to debug. And at the very bottom, there is a change log levels option. And we'll talk a little bit more about what log levels are and how to tweak them in a moment. But for now, we're just going to go here to set up a log for Amy. So I click change log levels and a new window pops open. So you can see here at the top, I have general settings for you. So this is the stuff that the debug log does automatically for me. As an admin user, I open the developer console and it automatically sets up a debug log for me. But I want to actually debug Amy, and she's not a system admin, she's not me. So I need to tell the console I'm trying to troubleshoot this user specifically. So to do that, here at the bottom, I have user tracing for all users. I'm going to click add because I want to add one for Amy. Now, the one kind of quirk about developer console is it's not quite smart enough to search for users by name. You have to actually put the ID of the user in. So that's just the one weird thing you have to do. So I'm already on Amy Smith's record, so I can just grab the user ID from the URL. It's a nice handy feature of Salesforce. So if you've not messed with user IDs too much, it's up here in the URL and it starts with 005. So I'll just copy that quickly from the URL. In the console, I'll click add down here at the bottom by the user tracing for all users. And it'll pop open a new window. I'm going to paste Amy's ID in, click add, and it has a debug log set up for her. So it defaults the expiration to about 30 minutes out from when you create it. You can make it go longer if you need to. Of course, if you just click down, you can select from a list of different 30-minute increments. And then I also need to set a start date. So I'm just going to go ahead and start it, or it says start date, but it's really time. I'm going to go ahead and have it start just a little bit in the past. Then the last thing I need to do is select the debug level. And we're going to get into more detail on how to actually customize the debug levels in a little bit. But for now, I'm just going to go ahead and grab the default debug level that comes with the console. So now all of these fields, just make sure all of them are filled in. I'm going to click done. And I have a log set for Amy. Now, one more thing to make sure in the logs workspace, right now, it's only going to show me logs for my user from the session since I opened the developer console. So any previous debug logs or any logs for other users won't show up. Well, I'm troubleshooting as Amy, so I want to make sure that I can see the logs that are being generated for her. So for that, I'm just going to do one more thing. Again, in debug, I'm going to uncheck the show my current logs only. So now you can see in the log workspace, all of the previous logs from other sessions as well as other users are showing up. If this list of different logs from other users and other sessions starts to get too cumbersome, this nice little filter box here, I can do type ahead search and start to look for, it is case sensitive, look for different users specifically. So I can isolate just the logs that are generated for Amy or for myself. So now that we have everything set up for Amy, the steps we're going to do to test are exactly like the ones we did before as an admin. We just have the console open on the side, and we'll see logs automatically generated for Amy. So I'm going to go ahead and log in as her, and we can quickly close a case and see what happens in the logs. So I'm logged in as Amy now, and I can see I'm in the service console that she's working with. She has some cases open when she was working. So I'm going to go and just grab another open case, and I'm going to try and close it and see what happens in the developer console. So I click into a case, and I'm going to go ahead and use the case close process. So I go to close case, just like I was as an admin, select resolution part replacement, and I'm going to click save. And as soon as I click save, there will be a log generated for Amy Smith over here on the side. So here's my log for Amy Smith. So I can see the exact, all the stuff that was firing when she chose to close the case. And I can see here that the replacement part order isn't getting created. So I'm able to reproduce the error while I'm logged in as Amy. So it could be a permission issue, or it could just be the fact that I was closing a different case. It might be a data problem. We're not sure yet. And again, you can see the exact date and time, the user, the success status, and whether or not it's unread. So before we get into nitty-gritty troubleshooting and actually opening the logs, I do want to show you what the logs look like, and we're actually going to compare some logs here in a moment. I'm going to go ahead and just close out of this tab with Amy and jump back into the tab I had open as an admin, just because we are going to have to jump back and forth into setup for a little bit. So just to kind of keep things smooth, I'm going to keep it open as an admin for the rest of the demo. So now that we know, we can see that there is a problem happening, we're able to reproduce the issue logged in as Amy. We're going to actually troubleshoot a couple cases that Amy gave us. We're going to compare a case that had a problem, so it's not creating the order properly. And then we're also going to troubleshoot a case that didn't have the problem. It's working just fine. So we're going to compare happy path to unhappy path. So we're going to close each of those two cases, have the log generated for us in the developer console, and then we're going to actually compare the logs in the console to see what's different between the two. So we can try and isolate, what's firing, what's happening on the case where the replacement part order is getting created compared to what's happening on the case that isn't getting the order created as expected. So one more thing that I want to show you guys is, remember earlier I was talking about the log levels. So let's talk about that a little more, and let's look at how you can actually customize the log levels in the console. So for troubleshooting, I want to actually troubleshoot specifically flows, process builders, workflows. I know that there's a lot of declarative automation in my org, so I want to make sure that I isolate any potential issues there first before I try to start looking at Apex code or anything else. So in the debug settings, the change log levels, again, if I open that, I can see here that this SFDC dev console is the debug level that kind of is default in the developer console. And this is something that all Salesforce orgs have. It's just the default that Salesforce gives you for debugging. If I click here into add change, you can see that there's a bunch of different settings for this debug level. So if you're not familiar with how debug levels work for debug logs, I can customize exactly how much information I want about the different facets of the system. So you can see here the default is just general information about pretty much everything, and then super nitty-gritty information about Apex code. So there's kind of a sliding scale of everything from nothing, no information at all the way to as much information as the system can give me. So the default, just because the developer console is a little bit more designed for developers originally, the default debug is focus on Apex. So I want to focus on process builders, workflow rules, flow. which is all kind of bundled under this workflow setting. So I'm going to create a new debug level for myself, and I'm going to call it something like flow debugging. So it's intuitive, so I know what it's about. And I'm going to leave everything default, just kind of general information, except for workflow. I'm going to say, give me as much information as you can about workflows. So now I have the flow debugging and the SFDC dev console levels. So I'm going to make sure that the one I want, the flow debugging, is highlighted. And then I'm going to make sure that the log is set out for a little bit in the future, just to make sure that while I'm testing, nothing expires. And I'm going to click done. Okay, so now the actual fun of troubleshooting can begin. So again, I got some case numbers from Amy. I had her give me one where the process was working, and then one where the process wasn't working. So I have these two open in my console. This case, the Whirly Gadget case, is one that she says everything seemed to be working fine on it. So I'm going to go ahead and close this case, and then I'm going to see the log that gets generated. Then I'm going to go to the case that was having the problem, generate a log as well, and then I'm going to compare the two logs to see what's different. So again, I'm going to select part replacement since we know that that's a requirement for the process. Click save, and I'll see the log get automatically generated over here on the right-hand side. And if I pop into the related, I should see a replacement part order get created because this was a case that was working properly. So I can see replacement part order is generated as expected. Now over here on the broken gizmo device, she says that this one isn't working as expected. Something's weird with it. She can't get the replacement part order to get generated properly. So again, I'm going to go through the exact same steps and get a second log generated for this second case. So it's closed, and again, I can pop over to related just to eyeball and confirm that nothing got generated properly. So yeah, it's missing the part order. So we do know we can confirm we have a happy path case and an unhappy path case. So I'm going to go ahead and now in the developer console, open up a little bit. We're going to open the logs and look at the details. So this first one that got generated here, I'm going to double click the row and it'll open it into a new tab up here at the top. And you can see that the red status is now blank because I've opened it. I'm also going to go ahead and double click to open the second log, and it'll open in a new tab in the workspace. So this is really handy about the developer console because you can have multiple logs, multiple reports, multiple things open, and you can quickly click back and forth to compare them in the workspace. So in the log, when you open it by default, it'll give you the extremely precise timestamp, the event, which is just kind of a summary of what it is that was happening. So you can see there's some different workflow rules happening, some flows happening. And then you have details, and this is the nitty-gritty information. This is where error messages will appear. For example, you can see there's some details about the user, my username, and everything of what was going on in the system. So this is where you get all the meaty stuff. There are some other columns I could show if I wanted to. Up here in the header, I can click down and select different columns. Like if I'm specifically, for some reason, troubleshooting Apex, I can select the exact Apex method, things like that. But for these purposes, I'm fine with just the 3 default columns because I just really want to look at the details and the events that are happening. So here, this is the case that was the happy path. So this is the case that is working as expected. So I'm going to kind of scroll through here and look what's happening. I know it's kind of messy. There's a lot going on, especially if you're not used to looking at logs. But I can see here that there's some different WF for workflows, firing. There's some flows, which also includes process builders, firing. And I can see here that a flow is starting called replacement part order. Well, that's the process we're trying to troubleshoot, so that's probably something related to what I'm trying to troubleshoot. I can see here that there are some governor limits happening, so it's telling me things like how many SQL queries have run at this point, CPU time, all that stuff. I'm going to scroll down a little bit past that into the really meaty details of the replacement part order logic. So because I told the developer console I want all the details about workflows, process builders, and flows, it's going to give me a lot of detailed information. So I can see here that it's doing some different, going through the different rules, which are the criteria, those decision nodes in process builder. And I can see here that there's a decision in the flow and that the criteria was true. So this case met the criteria for that first, my rule number 1, the first decision in my process builder was true. So it met the criteria and it executed, which is probably why it was happy path and it worked. So now that I've found some information about the replacement part order process builder, I'm going to swap over to the unhappy path, to the case that had the problem, and compare the exact same section of the log to see if something's different. So over here, I'm in the unhappy case, the case that didn't have the part order generated properly. And I can see the same exact process builder is executing to see if the case is eligible. So again, I kind of scroll past some of these governor limits, and I can see here the decision, my rule number 1, so which is the first decision node, and it's false. So that's my first red flag. I know that on the case that's working, it met the criteria for the first decision node in the replacement part order process builder. And in the case that was broken, that didn't work properly, for some reason, it did not meet the criteria of that first decision node. So I'm going to go ahead and hop over into setup and take a look at the detailed criteria for that process builder. Now I'm going to keep my developer console open so I can easily refer back to it. And once I look at the criteria for the process builder, that might make me need to do some data investigation. So I'll keep the developer console open in case I need to do that. So over in process builder, I have, let me go back and open it fresh. So here is my replacement part order process builder. And I only had the one decision node. So you can see here the my rule 1. This is just a default name that Salesforce gives decision nodes and process builder. So if you had a really complicated process builder with like 8 or 9 plus different decision nodes here, then you might have my rule 1, my rule 2, my rule 3. And so it's really handy because developer console can help you isolate the exact decision node that has the problem. All right, so sorry, my allergies have been getting to me lately. So over here in the process builder, we know there's my rule number 1. This first decision node is the one that's having the problem. So we're going to click into it and see what's the criteria that requires, or that a case has to have set in order to be eligible. Because we know that the case that was working, it was true, the process builder fired and everything was fine. But for some reason, the second case, the problem case, didn't meet the criteria. So we know that the problem is probably something related to one of these fields that the process builder is looking at. So what it's looking for, we have all conditions have to be met. So all of these 3 criteria have to be true. And it's looking for 3 things. First thing, it's looking for the resolution field has to be a part replacement, which we already knew that because it's part of the process that Amy's team follows. We also know that the problem product does not equal null, so it can't be blank. The case has to have whatever part and product was having the problem and has to be isolated on the case, so that way our fulfillment team knows what replacement part to send out. Then lastly, we have the contact has confirmed address. That has to equal true. So because we're going to be shipping a new part to the customer, we want to make sure that we've confirmed their address before we just go send something out. So these are the 3 fields that have to be set in order for the process builder to fire. So we're going to go ahead and we could just jump in to the problem case, look at these 3 fields and see if there's a problem with one of them, because probably one of these fields isn't set properly on that case. However, if you have 10 different records that you're trying to troubleshoot at once, it can be tedious to go into each of those individually, one at a time, to check all those different fields. So what we're going to do is actually use developer console to isolate these fields for those different cases and then see what the problem is. Also, if we do find a problem, because we're using the developer console, we can easily fix the data issue on the fly. So to do that, let's go ahead and use Query Editor and look at these 3 fields on the 2 cases. So back in my developer console, I'm going to click File and Open. So I'm going to open the case object to look at the fields that I need to query. So when I click Open, a new window pops up. I can open things like Apex classes, Apex triggers, visual force pages, but right now I want to look at objects, and I'm going to look at the case object specifically because that's what I'm trying to troubleshoot. So I could just scroll down through alphabetically to case, or I could actually type ahead and select case from the filter. I just double click to open it, and it'll show me all the fields, both standard and custom, on the object. So again, because I'm in the developer console, it's opening all of this in different workspace tabs for me. So I have the case object open right now, but I can also easily click back and refer to the logs that I had opened previously. So I can close them if I need to, but for now I'm going to go ahead and keep them open. So here on the case object, it shows all of the standard fields, and it's kind of a weird order. It's not quite alphabetized. And then at the bottom, it has all of the custom fields. So before I query anything, I'm going to go to the query editor workspace. And I could like manually type in a SQL query, but that's tedious. You know, if I have a typo or something, then it's not going to work properly. So it's much easier to go ahead and use the native developer console query building capabilities. So to do that, all I have to do is click on the fields that I want while holding down Control if you're on Windows and the Command key if you're on Mac. So I'm going to query these 3 fields that are having that, you know, the process builder is looking for. I'm also going to go ahead and query the case number and the status just so I can easily refer to that data. One more thing I want to make sure I query, because I want to make sure I do this in every single query I always run in Developer Console, is the ID. The reason you want to make sure you always query the ID is because if you have the ID in your query, that opens up some additional features for you. If you have the ID in your query, then you can delete rows, you can update rows, you can quickly reference those rows in Salesforce. And if you don't have the ID, then it's really just a view-only report. So grabbing the ID is always a good best practice. So I'm going to hold down Control since I'm on Windows, and I'm going to click ID, case number, status, and then scroll down and grab these 3 fields that I know the process builder is looking for. So I have those 6 fields highlighted, and I'm going to click the query button, and it generates the query for me automatically. So before I click execute here at the bottom, I do want to make sure that my query is a little more targeted. I don't just want to grab every case in the system. So to do that, there is a little bit of manual querying writing that you are going to have to do, but it's pretty simple. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and filter by case number. So to do that, I'm just going to type where, and then from here, it's pretty similar syntax to the kinds of things that you would do for a formula field or a workflow, stuff like that. So I'll type case number equals, and then I'm going to go ahead and grab the 2 case numbers that are from the cases that I'm troubleshooting with. So I'll build my query quickly, and then I can compare these 6 fields across these 2 cases, and if I need to, I can update them. So now that my query is ready, I click execute, and again, it opens up in another workspace tab. So the developer console automatically saves the exact query that you ran. So if you need to run multiple queries over and over with slightly different criteria, you can do that, and it'll save what you ran for each report up at the top. And then because everything is in a different workspace tab, you can easily click back and forth to compare different data sets. All right, so I have my 2 cases that I was testing with. I know that the one ending in 3.4 was the happy path, and the one ending in 3.5 was the unhappy path. So they're both closed. They both have a part replacement as the resolution, and they both have a problem product. But I see that the happy path case has the contact has confirmed address equals true, which is what the process builder is looking for, whereas the other case has contact has confirmed address equal false, which means it is not eligible for the process builder. So now I've isolated exactly what was wrong with the data that resulted in this case getting skipped. So with this information, I can do 2 things. First, let's say Amy already told me, yeah, I know that this case ending in 3.5, we already know that the contact is, needs this part. They've confirmed their address. For some reason, we just need to get that part order created. So what I can do is I can actually update this directly in the developer console. So maybe if I don't have this window open, or if I have even multiple cases I need to update all at once, I can easily do that from here because I have the ID in my query. So to do that, I just double click on the field. I set it to the new value I want. And then at the bottom here, I can click the Save Rows button. And it saves directly in Salesforce for me. I can also insert new cases, delete cases if I need to, although I wouldn't recommend just deleting records unless you really need to. And you can also just refresh grid, which is like refreshing a report. I can also, if I highlight a row, I can click the Open Detail page or open the Edit page directly in the Salesforce UI. The second thing I can do with this information is now I know that there are specific fields that need to be set for the process to work properly. So I might want to go back to Amy's team. Maybe it's a training point to make sure they know to set those fields. Maybe I should add those fields to the closed case page layout for that quick action. And maybe I want to consider some sort of validation rule that makes sure that when a part replacement resolution is selected, it requires the other two fields for the process builder get set properly as well. So I have a chance now to update for the user experience and make things smoother so the problem doesn't keep happening. So I know that was a lot of information at once, but hopefully that was helpful. So kind of in summary, we talked about how the developer console can synthesize the debugging tools and streamline troubleshooting. You can set the debug levels, you can set logs for other users, you can compare logs and easily filter logs down if you need to. You can troubleshoot everything in real time, which is another great benefit. That's personally, I think, my favorite feature is that I don't have to keep going back and forth to the giant list of logs that get generated from just normal debug log and setup. Once you're in the logs, you can look at order of execution problems, governor limits. Like you saw in the demo, we could actually compare down to the exact decision node in a process builder the criteria if records were meeting or not meeting different criteria. So you can easily isolate not only the exact process, but the exact part of the process that is having the problem. And you can easily investigate your data, compare records, and make corrections all on a single screen. So much less clicking all around, no more having a gazillion browser tabs open. So again, this was kind of high level, a quick introduction for admins, but Trailhead actually does have a couple modules that could help as well to get more hands-on and to learn a little bit more about the details of Developer Console. Kind of disclaimer, this webinar was focused more on how admins specifically can use Developer Console, whereas these Trailhead modules are a little more, they're a little more broad and they do talk about code to a certain extent, so just as a warning. The Developer Console Basics gives you a much more in-depth orientation of all the different features of the Developer Console. And the Apex Basics for admins is talking about how you can do some really basic Apex troubleshooting and writing Apex code in the Developer Console from an admin perspective. I note also that we want to take a quick poll just to see, in addition to the Developer Console for admins and the basics with Trailhead, what are some other areas of learning that you'd like to be focused on this year, just to help inform additional webinars and content that we want to provide for you.
So Rachel, as we have that poll started and launched, we'll let people vote. So a bunch of people left. So we'll give it about 30 more seconds, but we do have a question that came in, and this person wants to know about tips on how to read a debug log and how to know which log levels to set in the beginning.
That's a good question. So actually, and I can, I don't want to show anything on the screen because the poll's open, but in the debug logs, there is a lot going on. So I would say that I want something that helps with reading debug logs is actually that second part of the question is knowing what you want to focus on in the debug levels. If it can be kind of tempting at first to just say, well, give me all the details for everything across the board because I want to know like as much information as possible. But then it's like information overload and you just end up having too much stuff to wade through in the logs. So what I tend to do is I like to focus my troubleshooting and my logs on something, kind of one section at a time, at least in the beginning. So for example, I chose to look at workflow, process builders and flows specifically. So that way I knew that most of the lines I was looking through in the debug log were specifically about, one area of Salesforce. And that kind of helps me read it a little bit more easily. There is, and I should have spent a little more time on it, I apologize, but there is actually a filter, type ahead search filter bar in the developer console log workspace, and it's case sensitive, so it's not the greatest filtering, but it does let you isolate certain rows, like error messages and stuff specifically. As for how to determine, I guess, what level you want to set, that's kind of, unfortunately, it's kind of dependent on your setup. Typically, if I know, like if I'm in a client's org and I know that they have a lot more Apex than anything else, I'm probably going to start looking at the Apex maybe first. Whereas if, in the demo, I knew that org in particular was, primarily all declarative automation. So I chose to focus on the declarative automation. If I was hitting specific validation rule errors, and I might want to focus more on the validation rule specifically. So it kind of depends on what you're troubleshooting and, really just the nature of your org. Do you know that you have more declarative, more Apex? Are you on using a lot of visual force? So I know that's not the most precise answer, but I would say that it kind of depends on your org and what you're troubleshooting, where you want to start with that focus.
Great, thank you so much. So we did have another question that came in. This person wants to know what additional tools is good to have to export data from the debug log query, like exporting it to Excel from debug log, etc. And basically best tools specifically that combine with the developer console.
Great question. So actually, that is one thing that I really wish the developer console could do. Unfortunately, it cannot export data from the logs. So there's a tool called Workbench, and it's not native within Salesforce, but you don't have to download it. It's just if you don't, of course, Google just Workbench because you'll get a bunch of Home Depot ads. But if you search for Workbench Salesforce, it'll take you to the website. You can log in, and it has the same query builder that the developer console has. And from there, you can export data. So for me, developer console is really focused more on like troubleshooting, debug logs, investigating data, comparing data, making quick fixes. Whereas Workbench is really good for actual big data exports or even data updates. Like if you have a big data file and you want to load to update data in bulk, or if you want to, you can also do things like install a metadata package and stuff through Workbench. So Workbench is more for like doing maintenance or updates, whereas developer console is more focused on the troubleshooting. At least that's kind of how I use those two tools.
Awesome. So look, we have a couple more questions that I want to see if we can get through. So let's see. So I have a lot of people, I'm like trying to read through which are answers to the polls, which according to our poll, most of you want to hear about Salesforce Lightning best practices. So that's amazing. Really excited. Save the date. It's not up yet, but just save it in your calendar. One of our Salesforce consultants, Benjamin, he's going to be talking about how to become a master builder with the Lightning app builder. So that'll be coming in June. So stay tuned for that. Let's see. So Paula wants to know, do the logs only work on active processes versus inactive?
I guess I'm trying to think of, so do you mean, does it only work on processes that are actually actively running in the system at that given time, or like active versus inactive, like workflow rules? I don't know if there's a way you can ask that clarifying question or not, Stephanie,
Let's see. Let's see if we can.
I can probably
Paula,
answer.
I hope you're still on.
So
yes, actively running. I think hearing it made it clear for me, she says.
Okay. Yeah, because it does, if something, like if a workflow is inactive, for example, in the system, the definition is turned off, it's not going to be executing, so that won't show up in the logs. So it's only really going to show stuff that's actively running in the system. But something to know about just any process in Salesforce, is triggers, process builders, workflow rules, all of that. If it's active, it's going to at least execute and check the data to see if the record's eligible for the workflow or the process or the trigger. So even if it doesn't do anything, it'll still show up in the logs because it still executed at least that initial first step, just to see, you know, should I run any further or not? So hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, I think that's great. So 2 more questions that we have. Oh, the questions are just coming in. If we don't get to your questions, we'll make sure, and I'll make sure that Rachel does follow up with you. And I'm going to share her Twitter in the chat. So it's at Rachel Garten2. So if you want to connect with her, and you can find her on LinkedIn, of course, too. So this question comes from Jean. Jean wants to know, when updating a field like you did from false to true, if there was a validation rule, will the console allow you to update the record regardless of the validation rule?
Good question. No. So the developer console will respect all of the validation rules and everything that you would normally if you were updating it in the UI. So also things like process builders, workflows, anything that would fire normally from updating the record will also fire from updating it via the developer console. It's really just a more convenient way to access the data.
Awesome. So next question from Allison. When you are logging as another user and you turn that setting under debug to turn off my logs, does that setting turn back on when you log back into the developer console, or do you have to turn them back on manually?
So all of those settings actually completely reset when you open the developer console again fresh, which is simultaneously convenient, but also if you forget that it resets, then you might, get confused initially. So those do reset. So things like the show my current logs only will reset, as well as the debug level for the default. When you just open the console to debug as yourself, it will flip back to that SFDC dev console every time you open the developer console window new.
Fantastic. And then I think we have time for one more question. So Jesse wants to know, in the debug levels, does workflow pick up all workflow, process builder, and flows?
Yeah, so that'll be all of the declarative automation. I know it's not the most intuitive title. It says workflow, which, for me, if I hear workflow, I'm thinking workflow rule. But in the demo, we were troubleshooting specifically a process builder, and the workflow details under the debug levels caught that process builder detail as well. And the same thing for flow. If you have a flow that you're trying to troubleshoot, using the workflow debug level setting is what will give you more or less detail about the flow.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everybody, for your questions. If you have more, again, you can connect with Rachel on Twitter, and you can find her also on LinkedIn. And that concludes our webinar. We will be sending, I know some of you have been asking in the questions, we will be sending a copy of the recording out to all registered attendees, all registrants, and that'll go out tomorrow with a couple of the resources. I posted an article that Rachel just authored on Salesforce Ben about Service Cloud features that can improve some agent efficiency. And if you have any more questions, we'll hang out for a couple more minutes, or you can reach out to us after this webinar, and we will make sure that you get your questions answered. Thank you so much. Thanks, Rachel. This was fantastic.
Thank you so much. I can share my webcam one more time with my computer so I can say goodbye to everybody. Thank you again for joining. Hopefully this was helpful for you all. Thanks.
Yes. Bye, everybody.
Bye.